political prisoner of Nancy Pelosi. I'm a political prisoner of Merrick Garland. I'm a political prisoner. I'm a political prisoner of Joe Biden, the corrupt Biden establishment.
Steve Bannon has reported to prison. More on that later, but first, a landmark decision. The Supreme Court issuing its long-awaited Trump immunity ruling. The justices deciding that presidents have immunity for official acts, but punted to lower courts the question of whether former presidents Trump's alleged conduct in his January 6 case is protected. The high court's 6-3 ruling all but ending prospects the former president could be tried before the November election. Joining us now to talk about this decision and how the court closed out the term, the Hill's Zach Schonfeld. Zach, I know you go through these decisions line by line. What exactly is the ruling here when it comes to whether a president or former president can be prosecuted? What's the big takeaway?
Yeah, I've got the decision here in my hand from the Supreme Court, quite a lengthy one. The best way I can describe the test that they set out today is they pretty much put former presidents' conduct into 3 different buckets with different levels of immunity for each. So they said the president's core constitutional functions while in office, those are totally protected, and the government cannot criminally prosecute those. All other official acts, they said those are presumptively immunized. So the government, it would be their burden then to rebut that presumption. And then, of course, unofficial conduct, which everybody in this case agreed can still be prosecuted. But the bottom line takeaway is this is a big win for Donald Trump because lower courts had just completely rejected the idea that anything was immune at all. So this is, still some battles to go, but a big win for Trump.
At this point, the justices are sending major questions back to the lower court to decide, which doesn't seem like it will really be a quick process. Now, Zach, what does the ruling mean for the other legal cases that Trump is facing?
Yeah, it seems to doom really any chance that had remained of his January 6th case that is being held in Washington, D.C., where he is accused of conspiring to subvert the 2020 election results. He pleaded not guilty. Any chance that was really remaining for this case to go back to trial before November's election does seem to be gone because the Supreme Court's decision leaves open the question for some of the specific allegations in Trump's charges, whether those meet this new test of whether they were core functions, official or unofficial. So we really could still have like a mini trial go on in the trial court to determine, to play out with that test and what it means. But the bottom line here is this is not going to get to a jury before November.
Now, the justices have been heavily criticized for how long they took to deliver this particular decision. Democrats say the timing essentially delayed major Trump trials beyond the election. Did the conservative justices address that issue in their decision?
They actually talked about the lower courts and how fast the lower courts had gone in some of their decision making. Chief Justice John Roberts, who wrote the majority opinion, was joined by all 5 of his conservative colleagues. There was a portion in the opinion where they just talked about how some of these issues that were being raised on appeal as it went up through these intermediate appellate courts were heard very quickly. And so the Supreme Court talking about just the big stakes in this case and the majority, they didn't outright say, okay, they rushed it, but that did seem to be the message that they were sending here. So they didn't exactly address, congressional Democrats criticizing them for how long they took on this case. But I think, their message was clear today that if anything, this thing has been too rushed. And the one other thing I will say is all things considered, compared to the Supreme Court's normal case, this has gone a little bit quicker. Normally, they took this up in the spring. Normally, that would have meant that we don't even have oral arguments and a decision until next year's term. So they did take this up a little bit quicker than usual, even if it wasn't as fast as Democrats would have liked.
Zach, the Supreme Court's liberal bloc issued blistering dissents in the ruling. Justice Sonia Sotomayor said that the majority essentially gave Trump everything he wanted and more. Talk about Sotomayor's dissent, Zach, and she seemed to pretty much have some dark warnings there, huh?
Yeah, both her opinion and a similar dissent that was written by Justice Jackson. These were quite fiercely written dissents, really going after the majority. Sotomayor said that the majority was engaging in judicial activism at one point in her dissent. So certainly mincing no words. The other thing is Justice Sotomayor actually today in the courtroom read her dissent from the bench. This is a pretty rare occurrence. It only happens a few times for each of the court's annual terms. And it's reserved for when a justice really wants to underscore how sharply they disagree with the majority. So I think Sotomayor, just the fact of, even putting aside the words that were in this opinion, just the fact that she actually read this from the bench, I think just shows, how importantly the court was taking this case, as well as just how fiercely this 6-3 divide was.
After the court's decision, Trump posted on his social media site, Truth Social, quote, "Big win for our Constitution and democracy." Clearly a victory for Trump. So, Zach, how is the Biden White House reacting?
Yeah, the Biden White House, I think, has tried to stay out of this case as it's been proceeding through the courts, as they have, largely done with Trump's criminal cases, waiting until after he actually in his recent New York trial and he got convicted in that. It really wasn't until after the conviction where we saw, President Biden taking a little bit more of an aggressive language towards the former president and starting to label him as a convicted felon. So I think, even not just the immunity case here, but any of former President Trump's legal entanglements, they've really tried to portray that they've been an arm's length because, of course, the former president all along has been accusing the Biden White House of being behind all of this because it is, technically his Justice Department that is prosecuting this. Although, of course, the Attorney General, there has been a special counsel appointed, which does give him a lot more independence compared to your everyday federal prosecutor.
We know this is the end of the term for the court. Zach, what other decisions came out today?
This was one of 3 decisions that came out today. We had 2 other ones. One was the next biggest one was on social media laws passed in Texas and Florida over conservatives' concerns that they were being censored by big tech. So these are laws that restrict how big platforms like Facebook and Instagram and X and others, how they can moderate content, and also about individualized explanations they have to send to users if they deplatform them or somehow derank them in their algorithms. What the Supreme Court did today effectively was punt those issues, say when the lower courts were taking up these cases, these were challenges that had come quite early in the process. They were facial challenges, so they were all or nothing. The plaintiffs had an especially high bar to clear here just because of procedurally how this case was postured. And the Supreme Court today saying that the lower courts got their analysis wrong. So they sent it back for them to reassess, but this leaves the big First Amendment decision for another day.
Before you go, Steve Bannon reported to prison today after the Supreme Court rejected his emergency appeal on that conviction for defying a January 6th related subpoena. Zach, how long will he be in prison? And do you have a sense of what he plans to do when he gets out?
This is a 4-month prison sentence, so he'll begin that as of today. So he'll be in prison for the next 4 months. Steve Bannon, I was at his hearing when his trial judge had ordered him to report to prison by July 1st. And what he told us outside the courthouse that day is he said they can put him in prison, but his words were that it will not shut him up. So I think it'll be interesting to see, even now as Bannon is behind bars, how he still tries to get his word out over the next 4 months. Of course, he hosts his podcast, and so it'll be interesting to see what that turns into during his prison time. But this also, of course, came after he had filed emergency appeals all the way up to the Supreme Court as they were busy handing down these big decisions at the end of the term, trying to delay his prison sentence. The Supreme Court on Friday, without any noted dissents, had declined to delay it.
The Hill's Zach Schonfeld. Thank you, Zach.
Thank you.
The Biden campaign is on damage control. Biden continues to face fallout after his disastrous debate performance, sparking fears within his own party and calls from some Democrats for a replacement on the top of the ticket. The 81-year-old president now digging in, with his family and top allies rallying behind him. Republicans are doubling down, saying the 90 minutes on stage in Atlanta proved Biden is simply not fit to serve another 4 years. Joining us now to talk about this story and more, The Hill's Mychael Schnell. Michael, Biden and his family huddled at Camp David over the weekend, and the debate was certainly a focus there. So what do we know about those talks, and what is his family really saying to the president behind closed doors?
Yeah, the Associated Press reporting over the weekend and today that the Biden family is urging the president to stay in the game. Sources telling the Associated Press that they do not want the former president, the current president, to be stepping out of the race at this juncture, despite that poor, wobbly performance in Thursday's debate. As you mentioned, he spent Sunday at Camp David with his family, his children, and his grandchildren. I will note this was a previously planned trip for a photo shoot with Annie Leibovitz. But nonetheless, there was certainly sources telling the Associated Press that there was discussion about former president staying in the race, and the Associated Press reporting just there that the family is saying that he should stay in it at this current juncture.
And Michael, where do key Democrats stand on whether Biden can get back on track and still have the best chance to take on Trump in November?
Yeah, key Democrats, high-ranking, senior veteran members of the House Democratic Caucus are urging President Biden to stay in the game, to stay in the race. I spoke personally to former Speaker Nancy Pelosi, Jim Clyburn, former House Majority Leader Steny Hoyer, all on Friday, and they all told me that they think that the president should remain in the race, noting that his performance was wobbly, that he didn't have the best showing at the debate, but nonetheless saying that former President Trump back in the White House would be a larger threat. Them noting that former President Trump lied a number of times throughout the debate and arguing that Biden should stay in the race. Now, it's sort of, there have been discussions behind the scenes, I'm told from sources among House Democrats, about President Biden maybe having to step aside. I actually heard from one House Democrat specifically who said it's time for him to step aside and let somebody else be at the top of the ticket. That House Democrat and others telling me that the majority of folks that they have spoken with are of that same belief. But again, we haven't heard from anybody publicly coming out to say that that President Biden should step aside. And we're hearing from those senior House Democrats saying he should remain in the race. So we'll see if that changes as polls continue to come out, polling voters compared to before the debate. But as of right now, senior Democrats are sticking by Biden's side.
Mychael, at this point, 4 editorial boards at major publications, including the New York Times and Wall Street Journal, are calling on Biden to drop out of the race. And a new CBS poll and YouGov poll shows 45% of registered Democrats think Biden should step aside. What's the reaction from the campaign to recent polls and this type of media scrutiny?
Yeah, what's been interesting is that we've sort of seen the Biden campaign try to pre-butt a potential drop in the polls. There was a memo over the weekend from the Biden campaign where they said, quote, if we do see changes in polling in the coming weeks, it will not be the first time that overblown media narratives have driven temporary dips in the polls. So right there saying that it is possible that we are going to see those dips in the polls, which we're already seeing. There was that CBS poll that you just put on the screen already showing the Biden's losing some confidence among voters. But nonetheless, the campaign is blaming it on the media and the media narrative and potentially some of those editorials that you mentioned, including that New York Times editorial board piece. So the Biden campaign is essentially saying that while we may see a dip in the polls, they will recover, and the President Biden will recover in the polls and his numbers will strengthen. We're already hearing that narrative from the campaign as they anticipate these poll numbers to likely drop in the coming days.
Mychael, let's do a hypothetical here. What are the logistical steps it would take if Democrats actually decide to replace him on the top of the ticket? Can it even be done at this point?
Yeah, well, there's no real clear-cut, easy answer here because this is such an unprecedented situation, right? We're not dealing with another precedent where we can look back and see what happened there and try to figure out how it could work here. We are really in uncharted territory here. But what a lot of folks are saying is that one key aspect would be that it would be much easier to replace Biden at the top of the ticket if the president is the one himself who steps aside. If he is the one who says, I am no longer going to be at the top of the ticket, I'm no longer going to be running for president ahead of November, so another Democrat can come in. That would make this process much easier if that is the path that President Biden and the Democrats wanted to go down. If not, a lot of folks are saying it would be nearly impossible, very difficult, highly unlikely that Democrats would be able to go around President Biden's nomination at the convention. He right now has enough delegates to be the nominee. Those are pledged delegates. So if there were some sort of, it's just the path, if Biden doesn't step aside himself, how he could be changed at the top of the ticket, it's not really clear right now. So the first key question is, how is Biden going to react to this? Is he going to step aside himself or is he going to stay in the race? He is making it abundantly clear on a number of occasions that he's not going anywhere.
He's defiant. Certainly, Biden's campaign is going to air a new 60-second television ad in key battleground states. That ad acknowledges that some of Biden's own limitations are here in play, but it also features the president saying he knows he can do the job. Will these amount to effective messaging? How much more can the Biden campaign do to reach out to voters?
I mean, it's entirely possible it could affect things. It's entirely possible that it just goes over folks' head. Look, in all of these surveys that we've seen, at least before the debate, all of them, both the down ballot polls and the national surveys have shown that this matchup, this rematch between President Biden and former President Trump is just so close by every metric. All these polls, most of these polls falling within the margin of error. That means that any change in feeling in terms of these two men at any constituency of voters could be a game changer. So if there are some independent voters who are now on the fence about supporting President Biden because of that shaky debate performance last week, it's possible that seeing this ad could sort of change their tone and say, well, he recognizes that he's not the same Joe Biden that he used to be. Perhaps it was in 2012 when he was in the VP debate, or 2020 when he was debating President Biden, but noting that, they're still in favor of his policies and the achievements that he's made over the past 3.5 years, perhaps they'll stick in his camp. So it really is a toss-up here with these ads, but nonetheless, interesting tone from President Biden, recognizing his shortcomings as an 81-year-old presidential candidate, but still plowing ahead with that candidacy.
One last story to talk about before you go. Congresswoman Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez is slamming the American-Israel Public Affairs Committee, known as AIPAC, for pouring tens of millions of dollars into Congressman Jamal Bowman's primary race. Bowman, as we know, lost that race up in New York to a more moderate Democrat. Many squad members share Bowman's views on Israel. Michael, are there any other squad members facing election problems because of their similar stance on Israel and opposition from AIPAC?
Yeah, there's one really interesting race that's coming in August. That's going to be in Missouri's first congressional district between Congresswoman Cori Bush, who's another member of the squad, and Wesley Bell, who's a local prosecutor there. His official title is the St. Louis County Prosecuting Attorney. Now, that race is very close. It's neck and neck. There was a poll that came out last week that showed Wesley Bell above Cori Bush by just 1 percentage point. 43 to 42. Nonetheless, this is sort of seen as the next flashpoint to see how A, the Israel-Hamas war is playing out among Democratic voters nationwide, and B, the influence of AIPAC. Remember, in Jamal Bowman's race, we saw $14 million be spent by AIPAC against Jamal Bowman and in favor of George Latimer for those polls, Latimer being the Democrat who beat Jamal Bowman. So there are a lot of folks saying now that AIPAC's contributions in Cori Bush's district could make a difference. We'll just have to see, but nonetheless, that August primary is going to be a real key date for the Democratic Party in the weeks ahead.
And we'll be watching. The Hill's Mychael Schnell, thank you so much.
Thanks, guys.
Hunter Biden has filed a lawsuit against Fox News for a miniseries produced by the media company. In the lawsuit filed in the Supreme Court of New York, Hunter Biden's attorneys argued that Fox targeted the president's son and that the series intentionally manipulates the facts and distorts the truth. Hunter's attorneys first threatened to sue Fox over this series back in April. The company then removed the docuseries from its streaming service, Fox Nation. After removing the miniseries, the network responded saying, "We are reviewing the concerns out of an abundance of caution and have taken it down." Boeing has announced plans to purchase Spirit AeroSystems in a $4.7 billion stock deal. Spirit AeroSystems is a major supplier and manufacturing partner for the plane maker. The move is part of Boeing's plan to overhaul its safety reputation and quality record after several high-profile incidents occurred, including in January when a door plug flew off during an Alaska Airlines flight. The announcement comes days after new reporting that the Department of Justice is preparing to offer Boeing a plea deal in a criminal case involving 2 deadly crashes of its 737 MAX jets. A lawyer for 15 families of victims who were killed in 2018 and 2019 crashes involving the plane maker's 737 MAX jetliners slammed the settlement offer as a sweetheart deal, and the families are objecting to the plea deal. The potential deal would include a fine of almost $250 million, 3 years of probation, and oversight from an external monitor. Simone Biles secured her spot for the 2024 Paris Olympics over the weekend after winning the U.S. Olympic gymnastics trials in Minneapolis. The gymnastics superstar is making history as the oldest American woman to make an Olympic gymnastics team since the 1950s. Simone took a 2-year break from the sport after withdrawing from the 2021 Summer Olympics in Tokyo, where she experienced the twisties, which is a dangerous disconnect between the brain and body. This will be Simone's 3rd Olympic Games. Her goal is to become the first woman to win 2 all-around gold medals since the 1960s. That's today's Daily Debrief. I'm Margaret Chadbourn. Be sure to like, share, and subscribe to The Hill's YouTube channel. And come back here soon for the intersection between politics and policy.